Okay, Roy, you can go off and hide yourself now if you wish. Thank you for setting everything up. So welcome everyone to our Ontario NEIHR webinar with this month Dr. Lynn Lavalay, who is here to talk about spirit injuries, Indigenous perspectives of mental health. Dr. Lavalay is a wonderful colleague and work friend, and someone I'm very proud to know as a human being and to have the privilege of working with for the last almost 15 years that I've been at the University of Toronto. Dr. Lynn Lavalay is a professor of social work at Ryerson University in downtown Toronto, where she is also a strategic lead of Indigenous resurgence in the Faculty of Community Services. So on behalf of the Ontario Network for Environments in Indigenous Health, we welcome and celebrate Dr. Lavalay as our monthly speaker in our monthly webinar series on Indigenous health. So welcome, Dr. Lavalay, and thank you so much. I'm Suzanne Stewart. I'm the NEIHR principal investigator and part of the wonderful Ontario NEIHR collaborative team that we have. And I'm just thrilled to be here and thrilled to welcome you and to welcome Clayton Shirt, our traditional knowledge keeper in residence, both on the NEIHR project and here at the Waakabeness Bryce Institute for Indigenous Health at the Dahlonnet School of Public Health at University of Toronto. So I will turn it over to knowledge keeper Clayton to do our spiritual opening. And then after that, Dr. Lavalay will begin her presentation. And in the last 5 to 10 minutes of our time, so around 10 to 5, I will be choosing questions from the chat, the question and answer chat that I will post to Dr. Lavalay. So if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A chat section. So welcome and thank you.
Which, thank you, Dr. Suzanne. Just want to say I'm very happy to be here. I'm happy that you're all here. My name is Clayton. Everybody calls me Clay, but I'll give you my real name. My real name is I'll say it in English. Running Wolf. I am of the Wolf clan. I belong to many societies, but I also belong to the Three Fires Medewan Society. I am first degree. I'd like to say miigwech to all of you and welcome again for coming here and taking the time in these difficult, challenging times we're in. So they asked me to do this traditional opening. I'm going to say it in English. I usually I'm going to start with take a moment or two, I'd like to say, and just center yourself and wherever you are and say miigwech. It's thank you in our language, in this language, Anishinaabe language, miigwech. Say thank you. We always like to acknowledge, I like to acknowledge our first mother of all mothers, our mother, the earth. Again, I pray to her. Again, I pray for her. I give thanks for everything she provides for us, the people, and our relatives, the four-leggeds, the crawlers, the swimmers, the flyers. We give thanks and gratitude to our mother, the earth. We send our prayers to her, our thoughts to her. We ask in return to bless us with good health, with that medicine she provides for us. She's provided us since the beginning of the human beings, and she'll always provide for us. And we give gratitude and a good heart and a good mind and gratitude for those four sacred medicines. So we offer our sema, our tobacco. We send our prayers to her in gratitude. We say miigwech for everything she provides for us. Our first mother of all mothers, our mother the earth. I love you. I say miigwech to you. So our minds, our hearts can be one with this. We say miigwech. I offer my prayers to Father Sky. Again, I stand here as just Anishinaabe. I offer my prayers to Father Sky. With great humility, I ask the spirits of our ancestors to be here with you, with me, wherever you may be, to guide you, to protect you physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, to give us strength, to protect our loved ones who are sick right now, to give us that courage to keep going in these very difficult, challenging times. We give thanks to our ancestors who are always with us. We say thank you for everything. To Father Sky, that spirit world, we say thank you. So our minds, our hearts can be one with this. We say thank you. We say thank you to Grandfather Sun. We give thanks for giving the appearance of rising in that eastern doorway for those four sacred directions. But we acknowledge that eastern doorway. We give thanks for giving the appearance of rising in that doorway. You are setting, and again we partition, we ask that you will return. We give thanks to Grandfather Sun for bringing warmth, for bringing the medicine, for growing the medicine, helping the medicine grow to keep us, to sustain life, to keep us healthy physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. We give thanks to you, Grandfather Sun, for everything you provide for us and our relatives, for this new day. We give thanks. And if I have done anything at this moment, I have this day, I have this moment to correct it. If I have done anything in the past, I stand here as a man. I say miigwech to you for this day. I say thank you. So our minds, our hearts can be one with this. I say thank you, Grandfather Sun. We come together. We say miigwech. I give thanks to Nukumis. I send my prayers, my thoughts. I pray to you, Nukumis. I pray for you, Nukumis. I say thank you, grandmother of all grandmothers. I love you so much. I say thank you for everything you do for us. I acknowledge this. We acknowledge this. We come together as the people. We offer our prayers to you. And I acknowledge this. I say miigwech to you for this special thing you do for us, for me, for my partner, my children, my granddaughter, for all the people and our relatives. You do this very special thing for us as we sleep, as my granddaughter sleeps. You do this. You put the waters, the rivers, the lakes, the oceans into order for us as we sleep, where we acknowledge this, for water is life. So many of our brothers and sisters have forgotten this. I forget this, and I thank you to remind me of this, that water, the sacredness of that water, that life-giving force you give us. We thank you, Nukumis. We love you. We send our prayers to you. We say miigwech. So our minds, our hearts can be one with this. We say thank you. Again, we say miigwech to the great mystery, our creator. I stand here again holding my sema. I give thanks, for there is nothing beyond you, Nukumis. I say, grandfather of grandfathers, great spirit creator. Again, I stand here, ask you to have pity on me, that I forget so often that I am an Anishinaabe before I am anything else. And I thank you for making me this. Again, Creator, I say thank you to have pity on all of us. Help us. Again, Creator, I love you, Creator. I thank you for this beautiful gift you have given us, life. I thank you, Creator. I ask for your blessings, for all of our blessings in these difficult, challenging times. I say thank you for everything you provide for us in a good way, in a kind way. I say miigwech to you, Creator. Again, for there is nothing beyond you, Creator. I say thank you for this beautiful gift called life. All my relations, miigwech, miigwech, miigwech. Thank you for miigwech. Thank you for allowing me to say that simple prayer. I try to live by that prayer every day of my life. It's a great privilege and honor to be here. I'm very happy that you're all here and you're taking the time to listen. And that's part of my role here at Wampanoag to do those traditional openings. It's very challenging to do them in this virtual world. So I'll just paint a picture for you. Traditionally, we would be all together in a great circle, and in that circle there would be a fire, and in that fire we would have an opportunity to offer our tobacco individually, or somebody would come and collect it. But now we're all in this virtual world. Um, it's challenging. So I just want to say that, and I'm very happy that you're all here. So miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, Clay, for those words and just grounding me before this presentation and all of us. I want to say Chimigwech to Dr. Suzanne Stewart for holding this speaker series, and also to Roy for coordinating everything. I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to start right away because we don't have too much time. So here we go. Okay. Bonjour, Metis Quain, Dishnakaz, Wawashkiji, and Dodam, Sudbury, and Dinjaba, Anishinaabe, Métis, Quain, Dow, Nindawe, Magda, Nindog, Nindujaba, Timiskaming, Timmins, and Swan Lake. I don't know if you can see the subtitles at the bottom. I had that on for the class I was teaching. So if you're seeing it, great. I don't know how to turn it off. So it's just, if it's distracting, I'm sorry about that. I want to start by honoring the territory, but in doing this, I want to speak to the territories from which my ancestors have come. And I was born in Sudbury, as I said in my introduction, and very early on in life, I moved into Toronto's Regent Park. My mom was born in Timmins. My dad was born in Timiskaming, and my grandmother was born in Maniwaki and Gracefield, and my grandfather on my mom's side was born in Swan Lake. And here's my family, the Lavallee side, the last names are Gauthier, Pepin, Richard, Taylor, McKaye, Champagne, Marion, and Bolido. And on my mom's side, Labelle, Godon, Lafond, Larocque, Swain, Lillie, Courchesne or Courchesne, David, Gibosh, Carpenter, Chartrand, Roy, and Carrier. And I do this as a way of speaking to my identity, and also to do this in a relational way so I can connect with you. It's really hard, as Clay said, to connect virtually. So I'm sharing with you my family and all my relations. So what I wanted to talk with you about, I'm struggling a bit because something is covered on my screen, but I'm gonna try to continue anyway. What I wanted to speak to you about is the mental health movements that we've seen over the years. So in the 60s, we had the anti-psychiatry movement, where people were, coming out of, what they basically called insane asylums. We had the consumer survivor movement in the 1980s. I was part of that. I actually worked as a secretary back then for the Consumer Survivor Development Initiative. Entrepreneurism in the 1990s, the madness movement, or Madness Pride in the 2000s. And now we're talking about anti-sanism and anti-Black sanism. But all of this has been void of focusing on Indigenous people for the most part. In mental health, we talk about the recovery model. And for me, that's the model that resonates the most with an Indigenous perspective. But again, this is still a Western recovery model, and it does not acknowledge the ongoing colonization. So the recovery model talks about hope, empowerment, peer support, self-care, and medication recovery from mental health. With all of these things, recovery from mental health illness is probable, but you'll see it's void of spirit. The impact of I have to try to move something on my screen. I'm so sorry. The impact of colonization on spirit, injury, and identity is one I'd like to focus on. And for those of you who have attended ceremony or gone to a traditional teacher, we know that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience. So when we have physical illness, that is spirit injury, and it manifests itself into mental illness, into physical illness, into cognitive issues. And I wanted to just highlight, I don't want to go back in time, but just to recognize how our identity has been literally under attack and still is. So this is a quote from Bishop Vital Grandin. If you've gone to Manitoba, there's a highway named after him, there's roads named after him, but he said this in the late 1800s. We instill in them a pronounced distaste for the native life so that they will be humiliated when reminded of their origins. When they graduate from our institutions, the children will have lost everything native except for their blood. When I read this quote, I'm hopeful because we still have our blood, and we know that we have blood memory. And you know that even though there is an attack on our identity, we still have that blood memory to look back upon. Egerton Ryerson, since the Institute is in Toronto and many of us are in Toronto, but you know, Egerton Ryerson, people talk about the impact that he had and, you know, try to state that he did a lot of good, and perhaps he did, but he talked about Indigenous children being educated, plain English, and being educated to adapt to be a farmer or mechanic. He talked about, and I'll read this quote, "It is established by numerous experiments that the North American Indian cannot be civilized, except in connection with and influence of not only religious instruction and sentiment, but of religious feeling. The mass of the laboring classes are controlled by their feelings. With him, nothing can be done to improve and elevate his character and condition without the aid of religion." And that's why Egerton Ryerson advocated for children to be taken away from their homes. Genocide and defeathering. So I want to frame this now in our teachings. In 1970, Dr. Emma Larocque wrote a book called Defeathering the Indian that talked about the experiences of Indigenous students in universities and in post-secondary and how they faced anti-Indigenous racism. And Vern Asin Harper also talked about being defeathered. He said, we're not dead, we haven't died, our identity is still there, we've been defeathered. So in that, we want to focus on gathering our feathers, gathering our bundles. Genocide and defeathering. So in 2008, as you'll remember, Prime Minister Harper apologized for residential schools. And a year later, he stated, we do not have a history of colonialism. The Truth and Reconciliation Report in 2015 talked about cultural genocide. And I'm just going to read something that currently still exists on Wikipedia, which is a resource that we know many people go to. The TRC concluded that the removal of children from the influence of their own culture with the intent of assimilating them into the dominant Canadian culture amounted to cultural genocide. The ambiguity of the TRC's phrasing allowed for the interpretation that physical and biological genocide also occurred. The TRC was not authorized to conclude that physical and biological genocide occurred. As such, a finding would imply a legal responsibility of the Canadian government that would be difficult to prove. As a result, the debate about whether the Canadian government also committed physical and biological genocide against Indigenous populations remains open. So now we fast forward a little bit to the National Inquiry of Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Given the response to the statement that genocide has occurred against Indigenous people in Canada and how that has really been defended by our own government and by people in Canada, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry made a supplemental report, a 40-page supplemental report framing gender and race-based genocide. So this does exist, and this is the framework that we exist in. This is the environment that we exist in, and the colonization lives on. The Indian Act still defines who is and who is not Indian. There's an attack on identity, an attack on spirit that is more sophisticated now. We have Indian agents lurking within the decolonial rhetoric. And our own political advocacy bodies are at war over our identity. And take, for example, I won't go into that, but the Manitoba Métis Federation, the Métis National Council, and the Metis Nation of Ontario. So what I'd like us to think about right now when it comes to mental health is, you know, we think about the anti-psychiatry movement. We think about the colonization that has happened and the colonization that continues. But if we wipe a clean slate and we think about, what do our teachings tell us about mental health, right? And we can't use that terminology, mental health, because it has us it forces us to think a certain way. So we need to wipe that slate clean, and we think about illness starting with spirit injury. We are spiritual beings in this physical experience. And this is where illness begins, in spirit injury. So if we focus on that, how do we feed our spirits? Indigenous resurgence in mental health. I think about Elder Vern Harper and speaking about being defeathered. I think about Emma Larocque and her book on defeathering the Indian. And for me, Indigenous resurgence is about us gathering our feathers. It's about gathering our bundles. It's about picking up our drums. It's about learning about our own 7 generations. And that's why I did that introduction for you. Who are my ancestors? Who are my people? Where do I come from? Elder Vern Harper, would tell me all the time, we have to know who we are in order to know where we're going. We do have to look back in order to look forward. So who are we? What is our identity? And there's a lot of literature about identity and health. But again, that's a Western or a non-Indigenous approach to identity. But who are we really? Who are our ancestors? What is our language? What is our culture? And focusing on ceremony. So decolonizing efforts have funding for ceremony in non-Indigenous agencies. I'm thinking about an institution that I worked for, and there were a few sweat lodges or purification lodges that were part of the organization, but they would not fund the actual sweat lodge. So, or any of the materials. So I visited the sweat lodge one day, and I had to think creatively about how we can fund the actual ceremony. So the institution would, promote the fact that they're doing, ceremony on campus. But when it came to their financial accounting principles, they weren't able to fund some of the things that were happening with ceremony. So we have to think creatively about that. Our ceremonial grounds like CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and I already alluded to the universities, and our Indigenous agencies are thinking creatively about funding ceremony. So there is somewhat of a resurgence happening for traditional healers and lodges, but we need so much more. We need men, women, two-spirit and trans. We need places where people can go. Just as much as they can call up a physician or call up a psychologist, we need to have these ceremonial healing covered. At my own institution, Ryerson University, ceremony is not covered. If I want to attend ceremony, it's not covered. I have to use my own funding, but I can see a psychologist, I can see a social worker, I can see a psychotherapist, but I can't see a traditional healer and have it covered under my benefits. And that needs to change. We need sovereignty and self-determination in health and healing. We need to move away from the compartmentalization based on illness to healing lodges for spirit injury. I was an athletic trainer way back in the day. And when someone experienced an injury, you wanted to find what was the root cause. Because if you didn't identify the root cause and someone returned to play, they would be injured again. So you have to treat that root cause. So for spirit injury, the root cause is spirit injury. The symptomatology of that might look like mental health issues. It might look like addictions. It might look like, physical pain, back pain, neck pain, headaches. But the root cause is spirit injury. So we have to focus on healing that spirit injury. And how do we do that? We could never have enough healing lodges across Turtle Island. I think that's where we need to focus our advocacy work in trying to get funders to fund our healing lodges. We need support and resources for our traditional healers. We need to ensure that there's passing down of the knowledge that people who carry the gifts of healing, that they're nurtured within community so that we can continue to have traditional healers in our communities. So that nurturing the development of people who carry the gifts related to specific traditional healing. I know I went rather rapidly. I was really worried about not having enough time, but I'll stop sharing my screen there. So I will just share a little bit of an anecdote here. And, you know, when I talk about ceremony, I'm not a traditional teacher. I'm not a ceremonialist. I'm not a traditional healer. So when I speak about spirit injury, I'm speaking about that linking what we know in a Western sense. So, you know, the mental health movements that have occurred that have been largely void of Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing. And what I want to emphasize is that we have to come with that clean slate. Yes, we can have Western practitioners that come together and work with our traditional healers. But when we're trying to frame mental health, what is that? We have to start with that clean slate. So we go back to our traditional teachings. And if we don't have those traditional teachings, we go back and we find those traditional teachings. I also want to just acknowledge the work of Vern Harper, and I meant to emphasize this prior and before everybody got on. I mentioned it to Clay that I was going to be showing Vern's picture. He did amazing work in the Toronto community related to mental health and addictions. You know, his 4 Directions camp, you know, was in place prior to some of the stuff that CAMH is doing currently. And we need to fund people who are doing this work on their terms. That's that self-determination piece. But I know that when Elder Vern was trying to do things with the organizations, they sometimes would put in parameters, right? And come in with certain restrictions. And sometimes it's difficult to deliver ceremony with those restrictions. So what I'm talking about is true sovereignty with respect to our ceremony and hopefully having a positive impact as we move forward within the colonial structures that we find ourselves. So I'm going to stop there. And it's really difficult doing a presentation in front of my computer and I don't hear anything. I don't see any visual reactions. I do see a bit of chat going on, but I will end there. I know I went rather quickly, but I'll go to Suzanne, Dr. Stewart, to see if there's any questions or comments.
Hi there, thank you. Can you guys see me? I'm just not really sure how to operate
Yep.
this thing.
Yep.
So we don't have any questions or comments in the Q&A section. So I would definitely urge the participants to pose some questions. Let me see if it's in the regular chat here. There's a few questions coming in now, and maybe before we get to those, I just actually have a question which came to me as I was listening. And first of all, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Lavalay, for this presentation. And the way that you framed this seems so clear to me and so obvious. You know, the way that you've shared the information about what's happened in Canadian society, how the Indian Act has impacted and harmed not just our bodies and our minds, but our spirits as Indigenous people, and putting that alongside the evolution of different, basically human rights movements that have happened, and other movements to bring equity and reduce harm to marginalized people within Canadian and North American society. But what I'm wondering is, how can this message, which is so powerful and understandable to many of us who've lived it, how could this message be translated to be understandable to people who just don't get it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because they're the ones, I think, who need to hear this message. And maybe you have better success in in making those deaf ears hear that, you know, the Egerton Ryersons of the world. And there are many of those, of that ilk, still in existence today. I know he was in another generation, but we still have a generation of people who think like that. So I was just wondering if you had any ideas.
Yeah, I think we're doing it already, right? So we're doing it with these, we're taking advantage of the decolonizing efforts, right? So if an institution is saying they're committed to decolonization, it's about the people who are within that organization, whether they're Indigenous or not, and you know, having allies where we'll say, okay, if you're really committed to decolonization, let's hire traditional healers. Right? Let's have our benefits acknowledge traditional healers, right? So that part, that hasn't happened yet because that also involves Sun Life. But I think that we are seeing that with things like CAMH, the work that Vern Harper has done, the work that people are doing currently, where they are bringing in our Indigenous ways of healing. I think we first met years ago on a steering committee with CAMH, Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And it was about designing a program, an addictions program, a 28-day treatment program for Indigenous men. And, you know, we were inserting Indigenous ceremony. And what I hope that, the message I hope that I'm getting across, it's about not inserting our ceremony, but it's starting from that. Right? So it's, what can I do to advocate for funding? Then we also have Indigenous agencies that think creatively with respect to their funding and their budgets, right? So sometimes you have to position, like, you know, when I met with somebody about covering the costs of the Healing Lodge, right? And saying, you know, this isn't an honorarium. If you bring someone in to do ceremony and you pay them an honorarium, and the university then has to take taxes off of that, but they have to bring in all of their ceremonial items, right? Where do they get these ceremonial items? So I'll say, you know what? No, invoice me for the wood, invoice me for the grandfathers and the grandmothers, right? Because you shouldn't, that's not an honorarium. That's an expense, right? So it's trying to do that translation and think creatively about how institutions can support ceremony, right? But then even moving further from that, we know, you know, oh my gosh, her name just left me. Wendy is, you know, has a ceremonial lodge. You know, it's about how do we ensure that Wendy's lodge can be funded? How can we ensure that our traditional healers' lodges are funded? And what happens a lot of times is traditional healers, in order to, and we know we're not supposed to really pay for ceremony, and we know there's some people that do not have money for ceremony, but traditional healers are put in a place where they have to actually entertain how they're going to sustain a lodge financially, right? So they might bring in, you know, some folks who can pay some money for a ceremony so that they're able to, I guess, subsidize people who don't have that money. So I think we're doing it, but I think that what I'd like to see is a complete not revitalization, that's a bad word, a resurgence, right? A resurgence, sovereignty with respect to our health, our mental health. So that's where, you know, perhaps the whatever government it is, although taking money from government is sometimes worse than taking government from corporations. But, you know, having them fund our traditional healers, fund those lodges that we all know exist. Like, we go away to ceremony and we will pay for that ceremony, but our institutions won't pay for that. So I think we think creatively. So to answer your question in a shorter way, I think we're doing it with creative accounting at times.
Thank you. I think that answered some of the specific questions in the Q&A about funding.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few questions that I'd like to share with you from the Q&A. And one is really kind of looking at the logistics of some of the things you've been talking about in terms of how would you sustain sacred ceremonial space as voluntary realms when hospitals such as CAMH work with police and justice systems to keep people in wards against their will. You know, in terms of this, the ceremonial space, people would have a choice, but the institution that's providing it, say a hospital like CAMH, is complicit, you know, with these oppressive systems.
So this is probably not going to be very favorable, but it's a colonial institution. I work in a colonial institution. That's the starting point, right? And I think that our ceremony and that self-determination with respect to our ceremony, it has to be outside of that, right? Because if we are within, and you know, CAMH is great, Ryerson's great, U of T is great, but when we're in these colonial institutions, we have to play by their rules, and the rules don't fit, right? It forces us to do things. I remember visiting Vern one time, and he had to do fire safety training in order to light a smudge, right? And you know, put all these parameters in place, and it's frustrating, you know, when that happens. So I think when it comes to our ceremony, we have to have our own places with our own, I don't want to say rules, but our own ways of knowing, being, and doing. So when you talk about the police, right, we would have our peacekeepers, we would have different things in place to achieve what we need to achieve.
Great, thank you. Another kind of concrete question, so that comes, so within mental health, would you have different types of healing lodges? So for example, one for addiction, one for mental disorders, one for PTSD, etc., or would you only have one type of lodge?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot over many years, and I really think it's about spirit injury. What you talk about with respect to, you know, for PTSD or for addictions, or those are the symptoms, right? Logistically, you might encounter some issues, right? Like depending on how people are coming forward. But when I think about something like the 28-day treatment program, for instance, I think that philosophy or that theory doesn't really work for us. So I see our lodges as places we can go to actually gather our bundles, gather our feathers. And if we're there for a day, we're there for a day. If we're there for 3 months, we're there for 3 months. So I think that it's not about compartmentalizing based on illness. It's not the illness, it's spirit injury. Obviously, logistically, there might be some issues there, but I think that would be the focus, is spirit injury, not illness.
Great, thank you. So here's another concrete question that I'm going to throw at you from here. So bear with me while I read it because it's a bit long, but I think it's a great question. They're all great questions. Would you like to see Indigenous spiritual healing federally funded alongside the category of somatic healing? This way it's categorized under mental health and not excluded from mainstream entry into all Canadian mental health practice. This is being asked from the perspective of wanting to see Indigenous practices normalized and naturalized within the healthcare system. However, it's curious if that's what you think is best for the community, or if Indigenous practices should remain marginalized and separated as their own stream. And overall, what is the best way to advocate for the inclusion of these practices?
Yeah, I think that, you know, I was looking for the question, but I think when we are placed under something else within a funding envelope, we again don't have the ability to bring in our ways of knowing, being, and doing. So I don't think that self-determination is marginalization, right? So yeah, I think that I've worked with many nonprofits as a volunteer, and a lot of my work has been federal funding and provincial funding has been the go-to and the only source of funding. And I'll say it again and again and again. The parameters that are put in place by government funding do not allow us to do things in our way, right? Dictating different ways of, coming together, different practices. So I think, I'm thinking about a healing lodge and, within how we function now and the sustainability of that, a nonprofit model, for instance. If we think about a nonprofit model and you think about what happened with the Bear Patrol in Manitoba and how you have to have a board, right? And then the board then brought in police, right? And then it was that board dictating how the nonprofit would be run. So even a nonprofit, we can't function in the way that we should be traditionally functioning when it comes to ceremony. So I think being funded by federal government under an envelope that's not Indigenous specific, I don't think is a good answer either. So I know I didn't really answer the question, Suzanne, but it was kind of large.
Yeah, well, there was a lot in there, but I think, the point about should it be funded and included alongside mainstream or Western mental health interventions, or should it be separate, is a good question to infrastructurally, because it's about funding and it's about infrastructure on the surface, but it's really about is self-determination and autonomy. And that's what I got from your answer.
And I think the self-determination and autonomy, it's going to be hard depending on who's funding, right? And that funding idea. So I haven't come to a place where I can look at the funding for a healing lodge and what that might look like. A lot of the healing that's happening there, these places are not funded. It's people doing it with their own money. And that's how we're functioning currently, right? Is it enough? And I think that if the government or whoever's wanting to fund, maybe it's the for-profit model, right? Where you have subsidy for people as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is another couple of questions that I'm going to pose from the chat before I invite Clay to ask a question. And that is, how can non-Indigenous counselors or therapists working with Indigenous clients in a colonial institution ensure that they do so through a decolonial approach? I mean, other than referring them to an Indigenous elder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say, bring in, someone who can do ceremony. I think it's about educating yourself. The fact that you're on this panel and learning about Indigenous people. I just taught a master's course, and I've been teaching for 15 years Indigenous topics within the institution. And especially when we're looking at a topic like social work or mental health, we can easily fulfill the negative stereotypes, right? Based on what we're talking about. So one of the things I did this year is I had people watch 5 hours of video. I had them watch the Aboriginal Music Awards. I had them watch the Inspire Awards, and I had them watch the North American Indigenous Games. And people came away from watching that saying, I didn't know Indigenous people were so organized. So what we do in the university, especially when it comes to health and mental health, we teach about illness in Indigenous communities. And that fulfills the stereotype. So people come away after a 4-year degree with these stereotypes being solidified, right? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to offer students something different. I wanted to offer them learning about the strengths of Indigenous people. And, that being the starting point. And then I talked about Indigenous resurgence. We talked about all of the activism that has been happening for decades, right? We were never idle. So by the end of it, we can then talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We can talk about residential schools, but that wasn't my starting point. My starting point was, look at all the amazing things that we're doing, so that when you do encounter an Indigenous person who is struggling with addictions, you're going to think about all the positive things that are happening in community. Dr. Barry Lavallee talks about the fact that when it comes to education for future health practitioners, we need to turn a mirror on ourselves and say, what are we doing that causes illness in Indigenous communities as practitioners, as opposed to, what is that person doing wrong? What are the behavioral risk factors? Is the person smoking too much? Are they drinking too much? No, what are we doing wrong as a practitioner? And turning that mirror on yourself.
Thank you, Dr. Lavalay. And I have one more question from the chat, and I feel like it's the perfect question to follow what you just shared. And the question is, and I'd like to know what you sort of think of this question before you answer it, or maybe in your answer. And it is that, it just went away here. Hang on. Where did it go? The question is, many Indigenous people, including Indigenous people who work in health and mental health, may not have a comprehensive understanding of traditional understandings of spirit health or spirit injury. How can Indigenous people deepen their understanding so that we can bring this into our communities? What can this journey look like? Do you have any recommended resources?
What I first thought about was what I think we need to be doing in education for various professions, whether it's social work, psychology, physicians, nurses. And I think that our institutions have to hire people who carry that traditional knowledge to teach that on par with other professors. So I think that's what can be done. Obviously, if there's a question being posed right now, you might have already graduated from your profession. And what can you do to learn about spirit injury? I did not elaborate on the teachings, on traditional teachings. As I said, I'm not a traditional teacher, but it's trying to go out and seek those traditional teachings. One of the opportunities that COVID has provided are these webinars. There's all kinds of webinars, there's Zooms, and we're probably zoomed out, but there's an opportunity for you to, like I was on a Zoom call that was happening at UVic an hour ago or 2 hours ago. So there's an opportunity for people to learn more. There's a lot to learn, right? There's a lot of resources. There's different courses you can take. There's Moodles, those large courses that actor in the States took. I can't remember the actor's name, but there's a lot to learn, but it's learning about the strengths of Indigenous people. So if you're looking specifically for traditional teachings, I intentionally didn't tell you to seek out a traditional teacher, because people are very busy working in community, but it's about doing that work on your own. There's a foundation that you need to look at. So there's people who have written about ceremony, look at Michael Hart's work, look at Ernie Benton Benai, who just passed away, wrote a book, right? So do that work on your own at first, but please don't knock on the doors of our traditional healers and our traditional teachers. You can, but it's, I'm looking at Clay when I'm saying that, so.
Miigwech, yeah, and that was a great question. And I love the way it was framed. So thank you for answering that. So I'd like to, we have just 10 minutes left, and I want to give the last 10 minutes to invite our own knowledge keeper and elder in residence, Clayton Shirt, to ask some questions and have some comments and dialogue with Dr. Lavalay.
Miigwech, thank you for your words, and thank you for his very, very very emotional to, you know, just to hear you speak, and then also talk about, you know, Vern, who happens to be my father. You know, he's passed, he's in that spirit world, and he's doing his work, and he's there in all of this. And so thank you for that. I don't really have any questions, but just a couple comments, you know, because this is about spirit, right? And I'll just say this about spirit to people who want to. I just sort of put things in the context of how I see spirit, and I see them as two words. There's another word, and this parallel word, and everything's about energy, spirit. So whatever I say to people, whatever word you feel comfortable with, then use it. All right. So an example is everything is about energy. So spirit is spirit. Everything has a spirit, right? And we've known this since the beginning, at the beginning of time, since time immemorial, they keep saying, right? So that is very important. So I think about, and we've always known this. And so that, you know, we're talking four directions now. You know, the tribes of Europe, the tribes of Asia, the tribes of Africa. Everybody knew this in the beginning of the beginning. Just look back wherever your ancestors come from and just dig a little, and you will see that we all understood this in the beginning of the beginning. So this spirit and this energy. So everything is about energy, and you know, I say this a lot to people, and some people are not comfortable with spirit because it's it gets tainted with religion. Again, I made peace with all the religions long time ago, and that's most important thing to do. And I have the greatest respect for them all the most dominant religions of them all, even the Abraham religions, right? We all come from there. So that's important. So what are all those religions supposed to be doing? Cultivating the spirit, right? That's it, right? And they do it. Wonderful. And we said this to them in the beginning when they came here. We said to them, hey, you have your way of life. We have ours. All we're asking is to you to respect our ways of being, our spiritual being. We are being. And this is the thing about we're the human beings, and we never forgotten this. And so we're in the process, and you look around, the healthcare, etc. Everything is being attacked, you know, in all of this. What I mean by that is that spirit, the human beings, that memory is constantly being trying to be erased, right? And I say this so often, we are the human beings in a deeper meaning of what it is to be a human being. And we have start there. That's what I say to people. That's who we are before we're anything else. Our race, our gender, our class, our citizen, our age, etc. Nothing wrong with those things. It just comes secondary, and they all as well. And they all have their prejudice and biased views. But if you can see the deeper sense of what it is to be a human being, my bone, my flesh, my blood is the liquids, minerals of the earth, human. The being comes from our relationship, your relationships to the sun, sky, universe that I said in the prayer earlier. It's a very simple prayer. It's basic. It's primal. So if we understand this as human beings, that's who we are. I think we can go forward with all these things, but it starts there. And so the spirit is constantly being attacked by all those other things that people put before being a human being. And I must say, my father taught me this. He told me, he says, he gave it to me. He said, here, Clayton, I've given you the basics. It's up to you now. All right. Here's the medicines, here's the teachings, here's the pipe, here's etc. Basic stuff. It's up to you now. What are you going to do with it? And 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 that was so wonderful when he did that. I didn't understand it at the time, but that's what it is. We are spirit experiencing something, like you said, and I think that's so wonderful. But I just changed the word. Everything's about energy, and this energy is flowing, and nothing is static in the universe.
Mhm,
We know this. We've always known this. And
mhm.
so the Western culture is catching up to that idea because we always knew that space wasn't empty. Right? I'll go to that. And they're just figuring that out. And they forgot that. That's simple. So as human beings, we're coming here, we're saying this is who we are, this is our identity as who we are, and these are our teachings, and helps us cultivate the deeper sense of who we are as human beings. Anishinaabe. That's what it means, right? Translation into loosely into English. And all the tribes have this understanding. So if you're interested in knowing that, I think start there. And just sort of, whatever word you feel comfortable with. Spirit, energy. To me, they're the same thing. They're parallel words. And so I just want to say that if anybody's looking about that or asking that question, and I'll just say this about the whole things that we've gone through as human beings, the struggles as Indigenous people, I'll use that word, that we've gone through, that we also had allies. And we're still looking for allies, right? Because we never would have got here without them, right? And all of this, whoever we are, and all these people in whatever field you're in. So, and we're everything is under threat right now, right? Everything, healthcare, etc. Even your precious democracy is under threat now, right? All of these things, and we helped influence those, all of this. So you have all of those things under threat. And so Indigenous people, our medicine, our healers, we have something to say. So I just encourage people to pay attention, just listen to them. And they're all everywhere, and they're willing to speak to you and give whatever knowledge they have of the medicines and all of these things. And it's so important. So, and I actually totally agree with what you were saying earlier about that's a problem in the past about dealing with paying, we'll say, honorariums, healers. Because what is a healer supposed to be doing? He is supposed to be selfless and just give, right? That's the job of the healer. And if any healer doesn't know that, then they need to understand that. And it's selfless. And my father taught me that, and he was selfless. He gave and he gave and he gave. He never asked for that much. All he asked it, and so you can't. Here's another thing: you can't eat tobacco. So we're in this weird place where we need to live and sustain our lives as healers, as practitioners, and also, but we can't. We do this because we do this. This is what we do. We don't ask for anything in return, and that's the whole part of the lodge, etc. Everything. So it's very challenging, and I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, and I've been trying to find that answer, but I know it's not capitalism. That's not the answer, right? Either is socialism, because those are two different concepts. They're foreign to us. So we have to understand that as Indigenous people. And I know some are on the left, some are on the right, some are in the center, but we also have our ways of being, right? And that's what I heard today when you were speaking. And it was so beautiful. And I hope that everybody sort of understood that and understand that and make that very clear. And I think you did. And I just want to make that distinction between spirit and energy, because everything is about energy. I realize that it has a spirit, it has an energy. The rocks have spirit, the trees have everything, and we've known this. And so we have to get back to basics. And, that's how I see it. That's just my insight about my comment on all of this and everything, and that's what I try to do. And I know a lot of people get tired of hearing about that, about who we are and about human beings and the whole thing. And I love the point of the positive about what we're doing and how we're doing. And there's the other reality, and it's very hopeful, and it sounds very hopeful, and I appreciate that. And it sounds amazing. But again, hope is like hope. The elders say hope has a hole in it. I don't trust it and everything, but I understand what it means. But hope has to be based in reality, because if it's not based in the reality of the past, then it's just fantasy. And so it's very important. If you're going to look at hope and you're going to hold on to things and hope for things, it has to be reality based. And the reality is there's a dark chapter in Canadian history. And as allies, we need to know it. And the generations haven't learned it yet, but they're learning now, because I hear it from the young people. And it's amazing. So we have a lot of work to be done, a lot of work. And we need those allies and those people to have those conversations to keep going. So I appreciate that. And thank you again for your you just, my mind just went pew. And so thank you for that. And that's just all I have to say, and everything. So with that, how are we doing for time?
I think it's 5:01, so we're good. We're done. But
We're done. So I just
Suzanne's gonna pipe in.
Yeah, we're done. So I just wanted to say thank you. Our time is up, so probably a lot of participants have to go. So thank you, Dr. Lavalay and Clay, for being here, and thank you to all of the attendees who took time to be here. It's really thrilling for us at the Ontario NEIHR to host Dr. Lavalay. She's such a powerful Anishinaabe, Quay, an academic and community person, and you're just all of the wonderful things that we're doing in Resurgence all rolled into one, and you're a great mentor to me, and I and many other people look up to you in that way and feel very grateful that you're in our lives. And really value and respect the work that you're doing. And what you shared with us today was just a sliver of all of the work that you do. And I'd love to get into that, but we're out of time here. And maybe we can have you back at another webinar sometime in 2021 if you have the time to share with us. And I urge everyone to go onto the Ontario NEIHR website, where this webinar, as well as all of our other monthly webinars, are archived. Roy Strebel, the Ontario NEIHR coordinator, will put the link to our website in the chat. If I could ask you kindly to do that, Roy, because it'll take me too long to figure out how to do that. And you can see this there, as well as our Ontario NEIHR Indigenous Mental Health Knowledge Exchange, which just occurred in December. That was a 2-day event that is also archived on our website. So you can see these and others. And please join us for our next monthly webinar, which is going to be in February, which I believe, now I'm off the top of my head here, is Dr. Michael Hart from the University of Calgary, an Indigenous social worker and academic who's gonna give another amazing talk. So miigwech Lynn, miigwech Clay, miigwech everyone for being here. And Clay, may I ask you to close for us?
Sure, my pleasure. Just say miigwech. We say thank you to our Creator for this day. We give thanks to the earth, the sun, the sky, and everything in between earth and sky. We ask for your blessings, Creator, in these difficult, challenging times to protect our families, our loved ones, wherever they may be, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. We give thanks again, Creator, for there is nothing beyond you, Creator. We say thank you for this gift called life. All my relations, miigwech, 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 guys. Pleasure to see everyone.
Miigwech, thank you, Lynn.
Take care. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Ciao,
Bye.
everyone.